Newly released data shows rank and file Teamster union members in every state back Donald Trump over Kamala Harris. According to a poll results released by the union on Monday, Trump beat out Harris everywhere but the District of Columbia. This includes double-digit leads over the Democrat in battleground states like Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. Despite high support for Trump among members, the union declined to make an endorsement of a presidential candidate last week for the first time in nearly 3 decades. Donald Trump visits Indiana County, Pennsylvania, as he courts voters in the swing state. Here's more on that rally.
If we win Pennsylvania, we win the whole thing. It's very simple.
President Trump returns to Pennsylvania as polls show a tight race in the state. His Monday evening rally at the Indiana University of Pennsylvania took place only 50 miles away from the July 13th attempt on his life in Butler. The 45th president encouraged voters in the critical swing state to vote early, reminding them that his victory in Pennsylvania is crucial to winning the election.
We're here today because early voting begins in Pennsylvania over the next 2 weeks, and we need each and every one of you to go out. Just don't take anything for granted. We have to win Pennsylvania. Go out and make a plan to vote early, vote absentee, or vote in person on Election Day, but you got to get out and vote.
As Trump rallied his supporters, he reminded them why the results of this election are so important to the future of the country. He bashed Kamala Harris's record on the border and proposed economic policies, reminding Pennsylvanians of her plan to increase taxes and tax unrealized capital gains. In contrast, Trump explained his plan to relieve the effects of inflation for the average American.
We will have no tax on tips. That was an easy one. We will have no tax on overtime. You work overtime. And for our seniors who have been decimated by the stupidity of inflation, these people, what they did to you on inflation, we will have no tax on Social Security benefits.
Trump promised to reverse Biden's ban on natural gas exports, keep U.S. steel American, cut the price of energy in half within the first year of his term, and reestablish America as a manufacturing superpower.
Kamala Harris is the candidate of the tax collectors and the Washington bureaucrats. I am the candidate of the American worker, and I always will be. I always will be.
The state's 19 electoral votes are critical for any candidate who hopes to win the presidency. The latest polls show both candidates tied in the Keystone State. But if 2016 left Americans with any lesson, it's that polls don't always tell the whole story. Eddie Padilla, One America News.
House Speaker Mike Johnson is promising that the lower chamber will not approve an omnibus spending package to fund the entire government in December. During a press conference today, Johnson touted and he touched on the federal funding troubles as lawmakers work to get a continuing resolution passed. This would break with tradition as Congress regularly passes omnibus spending bills after a funding deadline butts up against the holidays. But Johnson is blaming the Senate for the 11th hour push.
This is Chuck Schumer's fault. It is not the House Republicans that we're in the position where we have to have a resolution to continue funding the government at the end of the fiscal year. We did our work. We passed 12 appropriations bills through the committee process in record time. We put them on the floor. Almost 73% of federal funding has been passed through the House. We sent it all over to the Senate, and they've done nothing.
The House is expected to vote on the new version of the CR on Wednesday to fund the government until December 20th. If Congress fails to get a bill on Biden's desk, a partial government shutdown would take effect on October 1st.
I know many look at the world today and see difficulties and react with despair, but I do not.
President Biden makes his final address to the UN General Assembly as president. In New York today, Biden said he recognizes the challenges from Ukraine to Gaza to Sudan, which started and worsened under his administration. He says he believes things will get better, but that the world is at an inflection point, and the decisions they make will determine our future for decades to come. As violence rises between Israel and terror group Hezbollah, Officials announced the deployment of more U.S. troops to the region. One America's chief White House correspondent Monica Page has details.
Pentagon Press Secretary Major General Pat Ryder made the deployment announcement that our nation is sending more troops to the Middle East, urging Americans to leave Lebanon as Israel makes continued efforts to eliminate Hezbollah. Joining me now to discuss is Air Force veteran Colonel Rob Maness. Colonel, thank you so much for being here with us. Now, beginning next year, about 1,900 soldiers are being added to the 40,000 troops already in the region. But even though we were told it's a small number of additional military personnel, what does this move signal to you?
Well, I think considering the circumstances, even a small move like this needs to be announced when the United States is making this type of input, increasing its numbers beyond 40,000 troops in the region. But secondly, I think that it's probably, and I will speculate what these troops are for. They're usually for like replacement levels, to increase levels of what's currently there. And quite honestly, you know, the Marine Amphibious Group is in the Eastern Mediterranean right now, and their primary mission is to do what's called a NEO, a non-combatant evacuation operation, or NEO operation. And they may need more personnel there because there are more American citizens still in Lebanon than they thought there would be at this moment in time when the need might arise. And the need could possibly arise very soon.
Well, what's interesting is that the Biden administration says it's trying to de-escalate tensions, but do you expect that this could be the beginning signs of escalation, or is this kind of a military flex that will be efficient in these de-escalation goals?
I would just put this at a status quo level type of move. That, you know, there's nothing that they want to point out about this unique small number of troops increased. So it's probably considered that way, too, by the Pentagon folks, is that it's basically a status quo. We don't want to indicate that we're escalating. So we'll go ahead and announce it, even though we might not otherwise do that in a big way like Ryder did.
Sure, that's a good point. And many people now are kind of predicting that this latest move could signal that perhaps the U.S. is gearing up for a potential strike from Iran, given, you know, the amount of vessels that we have and personnel that we have over there, and now sending more. Is that a prediction that's really not too far-fetched?
Well, placing the two carriers, and now the Truman is on the way over too, is a deterrent measure to send the message to Iran that if you try something on our forces, we are here to put you back in that box that you are currently in. It also is intended to be a deterrent on Iranians' direct attacks on the state of Israel, as Israel is trying to defend itself from Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Islamic Jihad in the West Bank, which are our Iranian forces.
Colonel, before we go, I know we just heard Joe Biden give remarks at his last United Nations General Assembly session. It appeared he wanted to go out on a high note. Perhaps this latest escalation in the Middle East has overshadowed any efforts that he really tried to put forth that were positive. So with that being said, what do you believe is Joe Biden's legacy that he's leaving behind when it comes to foreign relations?
I think it's a legacy of failure in foreign policy. You know, former Defense Secretary Robert Gates was right. The guy hasn't been right on anything in foreign policy and national security. And the state of the world depends, especially the peaceful part of the world, depends on the strength of the United States and the known political will of the United States, not whether the United States is constantly involving itself in wars that it shouldn't be involving in. And when you do that, it weakens us, and weakens us, more importantly, in the eyes of our adversaries. And that's Joe Biden's legacy. And then the second piece to that is it's appropriate for him to end it at the United Nations because he's a globalist. The election that's coming up is a stark contrast between the globalist class represented by him and people like Dick Cheney and the class of the American people that just want to have peace through strength so that America's vital interests, our true ones, like our security here at home inside our borders, are protected and our adversaries are deterred, and there aren't all these wars going on.
Very well said. All great points. Air Force veteran Colonel Rob Maness, thank you so much for being here with us on One American News. We always appreciate your insight.
Thank you, Monica.
Time for Beyond the Deception with Craig Huey, where he calls out some of the important stories the mainstream media underreported or misrepresented. Here for the news you probably didn't get to see yet is Craig Huey, author of The Christian Voter and The Great Deception. Craig, welcome back. Good to see you again. I want to play a recent statement from Attorney General Merrick Garland and then get your thoughts on the other side of it. Take a listen.
Our norms are a promise that we will fiercely protect the independence of this department from political interference in our criminal investigations. Our norms are a promise that we will not allow this department to be used as a political weapon. And our norms are a promise that we will not allow this nation to become a country where law enforcement is treated as an apparatus of politics.
All right, you heard that, Craig. The Garland DOJ didn't prosecute protesters who showed up outside of the homes of conservative Supreme Court justices. You'll remember that. And Garland directed his National Security Division to monitor parents speaking out at school board meetings. All of this while fast-tracking against the Republican presidential candidate, Donald Trump. What do you make of Garland's statement?
Alicia, it's shocking how he could stand there and look so sincere and so honest. You know, on the surface, he was speaking to the 115,000 Department of Justice employees. But did the radical left take it on the social media? Did the mainstream media, local news, and the CNN and MSNBC, they took this as an attack on Trump, on conservatives, on Christians, on libertarians, that they were involved in a conspiracy theory against the hardworking Department of Justice. But just like you pointed out, that we could go on all day about how they censored the manifesto written by the Nashville killer of kids and her radical statements. They've censored that. They've censored people who are speaking out on pro-life and arresting them, and grandmothers in jail. And they have taken even such things as people right now working on election integrity and sent letters to them threatening that they were in violation of the law and being able to maybe be arrested, putting fear into those who are trying to make sure the ballots are counted correctly. This is wrong. It's hypocrisy. And to say that he hasn't politicized the agency is so wrong and such a lie, and it's disturbing.
It seems like another example of a double standard, maybe.
Oh, yes. Take just Jack Smith and the entire investigation with Donald Trump. He waited 2 years before he did anything. He unleashed these investigations just in time to try to get Trump to back off from being on the ballot, to get him off the ballot, and finally to destroy the man. That has not happened any time in the Department of Justice history of trying to politicize an agency.
Yeah, well, I want to turn now to a poll. A recent Neapolitan news poll, it's disturbing. Now to a poll. A recent Neapolitan news poll, it's disturbing. 28% of Democrats surveyed said the country would better off if Trump had been assassinated. And more than half of Democrats believe Trump does not need increased security. Scott Rasmussen, president of RMG Research, said it's hard to imagine a greater threat to democracy than expressing a desire to have your political opponent murdered. How do you think these assassination attempts are affecting the election, Craig?
Well, you know, from the radical left, you know, when they're secretly hoping he dies, this is so disturbing. You know, for anybody who is a conservative, a libertarian, and a Christian, and they're for Trump, what they're seeing is a whole group of people at work, in their family, friends, who are so angry at the lies being spread, the hate being spread, that they have this idea that they got to save democracy, they got to stop a tyrant, they got to stop a dictatorship and save the republic and save the democracy. This is so wrong. All it would take is for Harris and the Democratic marketing machine to say Trump is not a threat to democracy. Trump will not be a dictator. He is not a Hitler. But they're not going to say it. What they're saying, oh, we got to calm the rhetoric, but they don't. They're saying we've got to be able to de-escalate the rhetoric, but they're not. And so what is the result? You named it. 28% of the Democrats wish Trump had died.
Yeah, and instead they're blaming Trump for his rhetoric for these attempted assassinations. You can't make this stuff up. Craig Huey, thanks for your time today and insight as always.
Thank you, Alicia.
Of course. Still to come on One American News, Florida is preparing for a tropical storm